said, so far they've sung nothing on my list. He had last week's bulletin. Well, my grandfather served in World War II. He served with Patton, who was gone 4 or 5 years. Before he left, his dad gave him a $2 bill that my grandfather carried all the way through the war and back. And it was sort of a symbol of promise, a symbol of his father's love for him, a sign of hope. Well, that $2 bill became a story that was passed down through my family. My experience with the $2 bill story came when I was an elementary grade student. In the hallway with my sister and my mother, my dad was working overtime, and it was one of the chili dinners at the elementary school. I see the teachers shaking their head. You can already smell the chili, anticipate putting the oyster crackers on there and the cheese on top. And my biggest memory from that whole night is my mother pulling out the $2 bill to make certain we had enough so that my sister and I could have chili that night. The $2 bill, again, a sign of my mother's love for us, a sign of promise, a sign of hope. And so I stand before you today carrying what has been handed on to me, which my sister carries. It's the $2 bill. A sign of hope. A sign of my family's love. We share stories because they're powerful. Stories help us do things that we just can't do otherwise, right? Stories help us to share stuff that we can't share through our 5 senses, that information that is more than just facts, stuff that is beyond our reason and logic, stuff that's not earthbound, stuff that's not stuck in the present. When we need to share that kind of stuff, so often we use story to do it. Because stories help us communicate things that are bigger than us, that are beyond us, hopes, dreams, love, desire. It's a way for us to connect beyond what's on this list. More than that, everyone has a story. And a pen. The pen is your choice. Sometimes we don't always have a choice of what goes on the page that day. Sometimes life just takes over for us, or somebody else takes over for us, and what gets written isn't necessarily what we wanted to write. But we do have a choice, more than we imagine, to put pen to paper to write that story of our life. So this month we're going to share about story. We're going to talk about 4 of the great figures in the Bible and their stories. Today we're going to do Abraham, we're going to do Moses, Jesus, and Paul the rest of the month, if you want to look ahead. Abraham is great. If you want to see Abraham's story, you start about Genesis 11 and read through Genesis 25, and you're going to see his story. It is wild, it is woolly, it is not always a story that we would want to tell. Abraham takes slaves with him. It's not something that we do today. It's abhorrent, but it was part of his time and his culture. But it's an inspiring story for us to learn from. Abraham is also one of the profound figures of 3 major religious movements on the earth. Judaism, our brothers and sisters in Judaism claim Abraham. Our brothers and sisters who are Muslim claim Abraham. And we claim Abraham. Abraham is in Jesus' genealogy. Abraham shows up so often in the New Testament as people reference how great Abraham was in our faith story. And beyond that, Abraham is just a very complex person. If you read those chapters about his life, you read of a person who is respected even as a foreigner in an alien land. He is highly respected. He's wealthy and he's formidable. There's this great story about Abraham's nephew Lot is taken captive, and various kings in the region are doing war against each other, and Abraham leads his own army out to do battle, is victorious, recovers his nephew Lot, and goes on to do treaty with various kings in the area. This is a way more complex and amazing individual than what we sometimes remember as just the story about Abraham and Isaac on the mountain, or Abraham and Sarah and the way their life proceeds. one sermon to talk about Abraham, so we're going to try and boil it all down into what we want to hear on one day. But there is an arc to Abraham's story that begins with these two promises. The promises of land and prosperity. God promises Abraham, what Melanie read today in the call story, the call narrative of Abraham's life, the promise that I'm going to give you land, and I'm going to make your offspring more numerous than the sands on the beach. Posterity. Amazing promises. Like lots of great stories, there's tension, right? The tension for Abraham is that while he has promised posterity, his wife is barren. She is well beyond childbearing years when the promise is even made. And the land that he's promised, well, there's someone already living there, and they're not too keen on just handing it over because Abraham rocks up and says, by the way, my God said, this is my land. Although that would make home ownership a whole new venture, wouldn't it? You think we'd do that? As we read through Abraham's life and see how he lives out this tension and this promise, I love Abraham's story as an inspiration for mine because it's so full of authenticity. There are lapses in Abraham's life. As you read through it, there's times where, like, Abraham goes to Egypt, and he is so afraid because his wife is so beautiful, he's convinced someone is going to kill him to take his wife. So he thinks the great thing to do is to convince his wife to be presented as his sister. So he does that, only to find the leader of Egypt to decide, well, since she's available, as has been told to me, I'm going to take her as one of my wives. And then when the leader of Egypt finds out that she's not really available, he is not just heartbroken, he is furious. Takes her back to Abraham and gives him this big lecture about, why did you put all of us innocent people at risk of being punished by your God by telling this lie? We've all had tensions in our life, promises, and we don't know how the promise is going to be fulfilled. Times where, or days or pages in our story that we kind of wish were published. Maybe we could just put those in the waste bin as rough drafts. Here is the example of someone who lived that kind of life. The other great thing about his story, the resolution to these promises largely come after he's dead. What's it like to live a life where you engage in a quest whose fulfillment will happen generations after you're gone? This posterity, your offspring are going to be more than the grains of sand on the beach. It takes a few generations to get to that. More than that, the land that's been promised, his people don't get that until after the Exodus. His people have to go from being the people of this amazing, formidable, respected, wealthy guy named Abraham to being slaves in Egypt for hundreds of years to being led out by Moses. Then they get the promise fulfilled. What kind of commitment to a relationship is that? And what does that speak to our commitments? The way we try to see things through, or the way we plan our faith journey, or try to engage our faith journey. Abraham's an inspiring guy. This is a picture from the scene where the angels come to tell him that his wife's going to have a baby. You can see their age. You might be surprised at that age too. Abraham doesn't even begin this quest until he's 75. If you're doing life planning, at 75, what do you plan to have happen at that point? And does that include taking everything you own, everybody that you know, everybody that works for you, your family, and going to a foreign land and building a new life? How many of us have a life plan like that? How many of us have a life plan where at age 75, I might be open to God calling me to do a brand new thing? As radical as that. That could be in those future pages. To me, that's a whole sense of hope. If I screw everything up until I'm 75, there's still hope. True? Now, he also lives to 175. How many of us are thinking at 75, we're not even halfway done? But what if we aren't? What if you aren't? What if what you feel like is middle age today turns out not to be the halfway point. That's a lot of pages left to write. And how amazing is this individual? He didn't have the benefit of thousands of years of knowing Jesus like our people have. He didn't even have the benefit of the thousands of years of being Jewish and a Jewish culture that knew God. This was sort of a new thing. If you start at Genesis 1, you've only got 10 chapters or 11 to get to Abraham. You're going to have, well, the stories of the Garden of Eden. You're going to have the Noah stories. Not a lot of stories. He stepped out on faith based on a promise by someone who was not terribly well known, but apparently so amazing in Abraham's life that Abraham took this kind of step. George Washington is the kind of figure that we often lift up, but he's held in such high esteem, he's almost impossible to follow. The guy has no faults. Oh, he chopped down a cherry tree. But what faults does the man have? Here you have a story, chapters long, of an individual whose faith is inspiring, but also authentic. It's earthy, it's real. It allows for pages that are scribbled on to be turned into pages that are gold-lined. Everyone has a story, and everyone has a pen. The sermon series is inspired by my experience at church camp with our youth, where their church camp theme this year was story. You can see some of the ways in which they tell that story on a wall down by our fellowship hall. During the picnic lunch, they're going to show a video that Kyle Schreiber put together of their time at church camp. It's amazing. They spent 1 week writing their pages together as a community. That's a profound experience. If you spend 1 week with people who also believe in Jesus, writing your pages together, it changes your life. Each Sunday we come and write a page together here. It changes our life. When we leave this room and serve together, we're writing pages that change our lives. How will you use your pen? It's a promise that we get to enjoy and a blessing that we will receive the more we use the pen.